Many of you are aware that the Environmental Protection Agency has listed the City of Moscow as a Phase 2 Stormwater Program city. It's been quite a few years ago now since we made our application for what ultimately will become a permit for the city related to stormwater, similar to the permits that we carry for the wastewater treatment plant. In anticipation of that permit coming forward and the programs that will go along with it, the city has been looking to identify how we will manage funding such programs and the personnel and equipment and capital improvements that would need to go along with that. So what's before you this evening is really the first step in that process. This is a consultant agreement with a firm that really specializes in looking at the formation of stormwater utilities, how they can be best put together in the particular state in which their client resides, in this case in Idaho. They are a firm that is familiar with the Lewiston stormwater permitting case a few years ago, the stormwater utility case. They performed, the folks that are working on this for us or propose to work on it are the ones that worked with City of Pullman in the development of their stormwater utility. They also have done some work with City of Coeur d'Alene in their stormwater utility. So they're, we believe, a firm that's well qualified to do this type of work. They've done a lot of these throughout the Northwest, but specifically have worked in our particular region and certainly are familiar with what's going on in the state of Idaho as it relates to the issues of stormwater utility fees versus taxes. So the consultant developed for us a scope and budget. When it was first put together, the proposed budget exceeded the available funding that is in the 16 and 17 fiscal years. So we worked with them to scale back the scope of this particular phase of the work to an amount that would work within our current fiscal budget. So that is what's before you this evening, and there are a number of tasks within this. And I should note again in the packet, we ended up with 2 copies of the task order number 1, but I can direct you, if I may, to page 142, which is the beginning of the contract, and then the task is attached to that following that. And that would be the one we'd be looking at. The series of phases of the work really are spelled out in task order number 1, starting on page 149. Individual task descriptions within task order number 1, or steps within the project, if you will. We would include within this phase of work tasks 1 through 6, and then actually 7 as well. The subsequent phases 8 through 13 would be addressed potentially in a future contract, either with this firm or someone else, or a different, perhaps a second task order under this contract itself. The intent here is to really get started on the assessment of what a utility could look like, what type of costs we may have. They will work with city staff in the development of a capital improvement plan. They will assist us in working out what maintenance and operations cost may be, and then take those overall costs and look at how they would be dispersed amongst all of the properties within the city. And there are different ways to do that. Certainly, we'll be looking at single-family residential versus commercial versus industrial versus multifamily. They all have different characteristics when it comes to stormwater. And so typically when you create a stormwater utility and you have fees for that, they are somewhat unique to those different classifications. In some cases, you can see going, well, let me back up just a step. Typically in these utilities, you see single-family residentials grouped together. So they look at an average lot coverage for impervious surfaces, look at the range, come up with an idea of what is a representative area for a single-family residential unit. And that becomes the basis of the rate structure. That is either an equivalent residential unit or an equivalent storm unit. They can be called either one, ERU, ESU. And for instance, I've seen them ranging anywhere from as little as 1,400 square feet of impervious surface being one ERU to as much as, say, 3,500 square feet, which I believe is what Pullman uses for a single ERU. That's important in that there's a wide range within residential properties, and you want to come up with a number that's reasonably representative, and recognizing you're not going to necessarily hit everybody exactly. But that then is also the basis for how you calculate the fees for commercial, industrial, multifamily properties. So for instance, if you had an ERU of 2,000 square feet and you had a commercial property that had 20,000 square feet of impervious surface, then they have 10 ERUs as their impervious area. So then in theory, you would charge them 10 ERUs worth of monthly fees. There are often more complications than just have that simple of a system. Sometimes I've seen cities that give a break to larger commercial developments, industrial developments for one reason or another. I worked for one at one time. Other entities look at if you have a system that directly discharges to the creek or the river and doesn't use the city storm system, then perhaps they should be exempt from being charged the monthly fee. If you have other features on your property that perhaps somehow lessen your impact on the city storm system, then perhaps there's some sort of a discount that could be applied. So those are the kind of things we'll be looking at as we go forward with this. The initial steps, though, with this contract are really to look at the costs and then start the initial development of what a rate structure could look like, and that includes assessing what should the ERU be, and then how many customers do we have in all the different classes, and then what should the number of ERUs be for those non-single-family residential properties, whether it's the 10 units for the commercial in my example or something like that. So that's essentially where this contract would take us, and hopefully I can answer any questions that you might have.
Walter?
Thank you, Mayor. Les, we got an email late yesterday, early today, where someone was encouraging us to look at individual properties as opposed to typical or average. And the way I think I just heard you explaining it was we were going with the typical or average or something. I know that if I still owned my home, I would have made out like a bandit because I had a parking lot just about the size of the one at, the Kibbe Dome on my house property, while other people don't. So if you use averages or whatever, I would have been charged probably a lot less than what I was taking up in the way of impervious surfaces.
Sure. Yeah, the option of going to individual rates, if you will, for all 5,000 customers within the city of Moscow. It is there. I mean, it's is it technically a possibility? I'd say maybe. What was suggested in that email was that we now have the technology to do that type of work much easier than we used to, and I think that's probably the case. I'm not sure that the city of Moscow is yet there. Our GIS system isn't necessarily to the point where we have impervious surfaces defined within that system, which is what you would need in order to do individual assessments, if you will, individual calculations on every single lot within the city. You could do them manually. That historically has been cost prohibitive, and which is thus the recommendation to use the GIS system to get there. My GIS guy was not in today. He was on vacation Friday and Monday, so I couldn't ask him the question a little more specifically, but my understanding is that we do not yet have that level of detail in our GIS system available to us. So what's proposed here is the approach I described, which is more the average median type situation. It is very true that if you do that approach, which is the way most utilities are doing them, there will be those that have less impervious surface than that, and so in theory maybe they're paying a little more, and those that have more, such as your case of your former house, but perhaps you should have been paying more. I liken it a bit to sanitary sewer, because we have a flat rate for single-family residential for sanitary sewer. It's a fixed amount every month if you're a single-family residence. Now, it doesn't matter if you have one individual who's in the home 3 days a week, or if you have a family of 8 or 12 who are creating a much higher volume of flow that has to be treated. Everybody's charged the same rate. And it's the same concept. You're trying to come up with something that's representative, that meets the needs of the community as a whole.
Walter, you have another question?
But some cities charge sewer based upon water consumption or water usage.
Some cities do.
So it can be done in that case. I guess my question is, will the email I'm talking about be shown to the consultant for an opinion? I certainly understand if you show it to him and you're GIS man and you and the consultant all say, sure, we can do it, but it'll be another $1 million. That probably takes care of that question.
Right. Yeah, we'll certainly discuss that. I mean, part of what we're doing here is, just getting underway and looking at, how best to approach some of these things. As we get into it, we'll have a little better idea in terms of the capabilities of our system. We'll look at options on how we formulate that overall structure. And so, that is an alternative that, we can discuss and see if there's a way that it can be done within the confines of this contract. And, then the discussion is, well, do we want to? And I put it that way because as soon as you create an individualized rate based on the impervious surface of that individual parcel as of today, what happens when something changes? They add a garage or a shop in the back. How do you manage that every time there's a change in the system? And so it's one of the complications that come along with it is the administration of that type of a system has some complications as well.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mayor, I would make a motion to approve the Master Services Agreement in Task Order 1 on page 149 of the packet, since there appear to be 2 of them in the packet, for the professional services of Cardinal GS in an amount not to exceed $119,960.
Second.
Okay, I've got a motion by Walter and a second by Jim to approve the master's agreement in Task Order 1 for the professional services of Cardinal GS in the amount not to exceed $119,960.
On page 149.
On 149, I just read that off. John, I'll start the roll with you.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that is the end of